Okay, I've been to County Antrim. My family are Irish, they come from Cork. You might have gathered by the fact that I've kissed the Blarney Stone twice. So I could go on for quite a long time. But this story that I'm going to tell you now, I actually heard in Northern Ireland, in Antrim. And it's a nice little tale for you, so it's a pleasant tale. There once was a young man, and like a lot of young men, the thing he was most interested in was young women. But he was a handsome lad, so he didn't have any problems in that department. And pretty soon, him and this young girl were what they call these days dating. Well, when they're young, you know, they only date for a little while. And they tend to hang around with their mates, and that's what these two did. They used to meet in the park with all their other friends and steal a kiss behind the slides. Now they'd been going out for a few weeks, and then the young girl said to the young man, "Don't you think it's time that I met your daddy?" Well, he was a bit taken aback by this, and so he kind of ignored her. But then she kept going on and on. You know how women can sometimes. She kept going on and on and on. "Don't you think it's time I met your daddy?" So to keep the peace, he said, "All right." So he took her round to his dad's house, and Dad made a nice pot of tea, and they were chatting away. And then the father said to the son, he said, "Son, there's a great big rock out in that field," he said, "and every time I plough, it gets in the way. Would you ever go outside and move it for me?" So the young man goes out, and it is really quite a large rock. And he gets down, and he gets a grip of this rock, and he heaves, and he shoves, but the rock doesn't move, not even 1 inch. So he goes back into the house, and he says, "Dad, I can't move that rock." He said, "It's stuck fast." And the father looked at the girl, and he looked at the son, and he said, "Would you ever look at him? What would you be doing with a weak man like that?" And the young girl looked at him, and she said, "You're right." She got up, she left. Well, the young man, he was mortified, as you can imagine. He vowed in that moment that he was never going to bring a young girl back to the house again. But he was a young man, and he pretty soon picked himself up and got himself back together, and soon he forgot all about it, and he left school and got himself a job, started to have a few bob in his pocket, and then a lovely young girl caught his eye, and they started dating. But now he had a bit of money in his pocket. There was none of this going to the park or anything like that. He took her out for a slap-up meal. Burger. Chips. Anyway, they've been going out a few months, and the girl says to him, you know what she said to him? "Don't you think it's time that I met your daddy?" He's like, blimey, she don't hang about, does she? And he made all sorts of excuses because he wasn't going to go through that again. But he started to go to the gym and work himself out. He thought, if I've got to do this again, I'm going to get it right. Anyway, as young women do, she went on and on and on. "Come on," she says, "when are you going to take me to meet your daddy?" And as soon as he felt like his muscles were strong enough and ripped enough, he said, "Okay, come round and meet my dad." Well, this time, Dad didn't just make a pot of tea, he baked a cake as well. And they were sitting there chatting, and then of course the question came, "Son, there's a great big rock out in that field," he said, "and every time I try and plough," he says, it gets in my way. Would you ever go out there and move it for me? Yeah, of course I will, Dad. And off he goes. And he gets down, but he's feeling quite confident this time. And he gets down and gets down. And he cannot move that rock, not 1 inch. But he's reluctant to go back in and say so. So he gives it another go. He cannot do it. So he goes back into the house with his head held down. Can't move the rock, Dad. Stuck fast. And the father looks at the young woman and he looks at the son and he says, would you ever look at that weakling? He says, what would you be doing with a weak man like that? Well, the young girl, she sat and she thought for a bit. And she said, you're right. And she got up and she left. Well, he was absolutely gobsmacked, the young man. He thought, how could this happen again? I am absolutely, categorically, never ever bringing a woman back to this house ever again. But he was a young man. And like all young men, he got over it quite quickly. And he started getting on with his life. And he earned quite a bit of money and he was able to buy himself a little second-hand car, run around. And then a few months down the line, he met up with his pals. And there was a young woman, the likes that he had never seen before, that had just moved into the area. He had never seen such a beauty. And every time he saw her, his heart used to pound in his chest and his cheeks would go red and he'd trip over his words. Wow. And pretty soon, because he was a good-looking man himself, they were dating. But this time, forget about the park, forget about dining out and burger and chips. This girl was special. Roving up the mountains, watching the buzzards soar, swimming in the river, running through the flower-filled meadows. Oh my goodness, he had got it bad. And they'd been going out for about a year. And guess what? She says, don't you think it's about time I met your daddy? Well, he was ready this time because he knew it was coming and he knew that he wanted to take her. So not only had he carried on working out, but every time he visited his dad, he dug out a bit of the soil around the rock every time he thought, ha-ha. Anyway, he takes her to meet the daddy. Not just a cup of tea, not just cake, full roast dinner with all the trimmings. Absolutely stunning. They sat there chatting, and then the inevitable happens. Son, there's a great big rock out there in the field, and every time I try and plough, it gets in my way. Would you ever go out there and move it for him? Yeah, of course I will, Dad, no problem. And off he goes, and he gets down to the rock, and he gets himself, and he's like, clears a bit more of the soil out, and he thinks, I've got it this time, this is going to be absolutely fine. And he gets down to the rock, and he's like, oh, and he cannot move the rock, not 1 inch. But then, a shadow passes over his face, and another pair of hands appear at the other side of the rock, and together they manage to get the rock out of the ground and manhandle it over to the side of the field. And when he looks up, they're gazing at him, and his beautiful blue twinkling eyes, and it's the girl. And he turns, and there, standing with his arm against the frame of the back door, is Dad. And he says, you know what, son? This is the girl for you. Thank you very much. Happy New Year.